Okay, so yesterday in our first session, we have mostly discussed idea and how to find ideas, where to find ideas, how to empty our brain to put all these ideas in one place. So we talked basically about mind mapping. We talked about this technology, and using this technology, I asked you to come up with your own ideas, to connect your ideas, to identify your main idea, and then to find which ideas support your main idea and which support your sub ideas. So probably you have done this, I hope so. And if you already have an idea about your first story, so this is the continuation now. When you have identified your central message, now we will move on to writing narrative. Narrative, or the words that you narrate throughout your story, it's also one of the most important things. Well, in fact, it is the moving thing in your story because words really matter. This is the way how you tell your story. Images, videos, music, and other techniques that you use, they make your story very beautiful, colorful, catchy, but actually your message is sent just like any stories with means of words. So let's start. We are going to talk about narratives today. Okay, we have probably heard the expression, those who tell the stories rule the world very often. We are going to create digital stories with the purpose of using them in our classrooms later on. That's why we'll mostly focus on our students' perception of digital stories and our students' perception of narratives. So, a student in your class, when you assign a digital storytelling task to them, they may have a difficulty finding ideas, how to create something. So here, you should encourage them, telling that they tell stories every day. Everyone has a story, everyone tells it in a different way. But if we approach our stories in a little bit different way, we can come up with a great story, which can be a narrative. Well, a student might create a completely fictional story, but narrated in a first person, expressing it from his or her point of view, or vice versa. A student can rely on personal experience, but using the third person narrative, student can make this story from someone else's point of view. Both cases work well. It depends on what they choose. A student might tell a true story that happened to someone else, so again, from their own experiences, but identifying this person as another person. So whatever they choose, it's better to encourage them to tell the stories that they know, that they personally can relate to. And the same here in our workshop, when you are creating the story, when you have an idea about the story, it's better to create a story that you know. It's about the story that it's very important to tell a story that you can personally narrate to, that you have a feeling for. So as a teachers, we mostly write essays, paragraphs, and we teach writing to our students. And sometimes there can be a little bit confusion about the difference between narrative and essay or a paragraph. So what is a narrative and what is an essay, and how can we differentiate them? Is the narrative the same as essay, or has it some differences? Well, let's first of all talk about the narrative. Narrative is a story, but it's a story, well, which is a little bit different from the essay format. Narrative is, in the first place, aimed at creating emotion, creating empathy. So, here's an example of the howling wind created a sense of spine-tingling eeriness in the secluded forest. Actually, this sentence is not informative. We cannot get much information out of this sentence, but the feeling, emotion we have when we read the sentence is different than the simple structured sentences we read in essays, right? Well, also narrative usually sets up a scene. It shows a certain time period, weather, culture, place, or characters. And narrative always contains a beginning, middle, and the end. Climax of a narrative, usually the high point. It's the point where everything resolves. So narrative has a clear beginning, it has clear body, and it has clear ending. So, compared to narrative, essays or paragraphs have their differences. In the first place, essays usually explain a process. They tell you um, what to do and how to do, or you give opinions with essays, or you show cause and effect relationship, or you can identify problems and propose solutions to these problems. But usually, essays or paragraphs, they are not aimed at creating emotions. So, as we are writing narrative for our digital story, you have to pay more attention on the emotion you are giving to your audience. Are they feeling your words? Are they feeling in your shoes? This is really important. So, when writing a narrative, you have to address the figurative language strategies. Figurative language means just like similes, metaphors, personification, symbolism, or parables. Similes, probably you guys know because you all come from the background of English teaching. The words like, as is used to compare one thing to another thing. An example can be as hungry as a horse or like a bat out of hell. Using this kind of similes in our narrative makes our language strong and it gets the listener's attention ASAP. So metaphor is describing one or more things as something else. It's very common in poetry. Well, so nothing more than a mouse when he walked up on the stage. This is a clear example of metaphor. Using metaphors or similes in our narratives makes it rich, makes it catchy. Personification is another means that can be used in writing a narrative. So when you personify something, you give human characteristics to non-human objects, for example, to animals or items, just like given in this example. Stars in the night sky watched over me. Of course, we know that stars don't have eyes, they can watch for us, but giving human characteristics to stars makes our message very vivid and it creates emotions to the listeners. So as emotions and empathy building is our main aim here, we should address to this kind of figurative language strategies very often when writing a narrative. Another one is the symbolism. Well, in symbolism, one thing stands for another thing that is more abstract, like a cross is a symbol of Christianity, or a rundown building or leafless trees could symbol aging, and etc. So in our digital stories, we usually tell the story, and then with the help of images and videos, we show the story. When choosing images or videos, it's very important to show the symbolic pictures that clearly match your narrative. For example, if you are talking about an aging person, you can use leafless trees. So combined with this image, your message will be delivered in a powerful way. Parable is another strategy or another aspect of figurative language that we usually use in narrative. Parable is a story that has a second meaning within itself. For example, the Jesus parable, we all know that it was sword that was a symbol for God, or we can come up with any other parables and simple parables that we use every day as a language teachers. Summing up, figurative language makes our narrative very rich, very powerful. It creates emotions. It makes the audience feel our message. addressing figurative language is very important. So when writing your narrative, try to use catchy expressions and this kind of figurative language things. If you hear a phrase that catches your attention, keep a notebook and keep writing it down, because one day when creating a story or when telling a story, it will come to your aid. I personally do this. I personally keep a small notebook where I keep all these phrases that I hear. Well, some of them sound very amazing. So I take a look at them second time in creating stories. And then something suddenly pops up to my mind and gives a good idea. So figurative language is basically what we often address in narrative writing. Before starting a narrative, so last time we have identified our message, we have connected our ideas, now we have an idea. We are going to create a digital story addressing one issue touching young girls in our community, in our local community. In order to create this digital story, we have to be ready with the narrative first. I always suggest you to write and prepare the narrative first, and then choose the media, music, sounds, videos, and images according to the narrative. Your digital story should be based on the narrative. Narrative should be your ground thing. So everything should be built upon the narrative. It's very important to plan your narrative before writing it. How can we plan a narrative? So we have this topic, true colors of the rainbow, and we have an idea. For example, you are about to address a gender issue. Young girls are usually restrained to pursue education. They don't have equal access to education. If this is the issue you would like to address, then I really recommend you to read or watch some good examples or models. You can search YouTube for example digital stories, or you can read motivational stories online, and it will give you ideas. It will help you identify your own ideas. And you have to be aware of the structure of narrative. So this is how we basically design our narrative. You have to stick to the central topic. Then you have to map your story, just like we mapped our ideas last time via mind mapping software. You have to map and organize your story. After we have a mapped story, we will move on to the drafting part. In drafting part, we will prepare the first text of our narrative. Then you have to plan the pacing. Pacing is really important because your narrative and images and videos running in your digital story should match each other. They should go parallel. And of course, when everything is ready, we have to take a second look on that. We have to proofread, edit, and revise our narrative so that we can build multimedia on it. So once our narrative plan is ready, we can start writing right away. Before writing, I told you that it's recommended to watch good examples or models. So to tell a story should be easy. It shouldn't be difficult. You don't really have to push yourself to say something worthwhile. Your message can be very simple, but it should be touchy. Even simple messages can be delivered very successfully if you choose right words, if you research enough, if you create emotions. So actually, if you watch digital stories online, you see that effective stories don't usually use very strong or um, very difficult words. They are built upon simple words, but they are built upon in such a way that create emotion in you. So we have read or we have watched some of the good examples of the stories. Last time also we watched one digital story which was very motivational, and now probably you are trying to figure out how to start, right? So how to start is should be based on the structure. You have to know that there is a certain structure accepted in narrative. every narrative is built upon this structure. So you have to have a beginning, which is exposition. That's the background information. So this is basically setting the stage for your story. After that, you have to, well, come up with a conflict. If you have an idea, so there should be some obstacle from, making your idea worthwhile. Or maybe you want to urge young women to do something, but there is an obstacle. So this is going to be your conflict part. After that, we will be rising to action. Here, your motivational words or sequence of events that will happen if your message is accepted comes here. After that, we will come up to the climax or a turning point. It should be the point, it should be the strongest part of your story, which will make your audience change their opinions about what they already have, feel themselves in your shoes, and follow the message that you are spreading. After that, you will have following action and resolution part. Usually, resolution in digital stories is a motivational ending. So, keep this structure in mind when writing a narrative. You should begin, set a stage, create conflict, then you have to come up with a high point, which is the central turning point of your story, where your message is clearly delivered. After you have learned about the structure, you have to know that you have to stick to the central topic. When creating a digital story, I usually firstly create my central idea, or I write down my central idea, just like we did last time with the help of this mind mapping device. So I really recommend you to write down or type your central idea and put in front of you, in front of your device when creating a digital story. When you write a narrative, try to avoid any sentences, any messages, or any paragraphs that don't serve the purpose of this central idea. Digital stories should be as short as possible. To make them as short as possible, you have
We have to do many
yeah,
practices.
things happen. Even in
Yes,
perfectly planned lessons, sometimes, not sometimes, most of the times, things
yes.
go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for your understanding. Okay, so we talked about the pleasure and plagiarism thing. What is considered as plagiarism? In one sentence, you cannot use. If you take more than 3 words of someone else's idea, you have to refer to that person, or otherwise it's considered as plagiarism. So you have to be aware of the copyright thing, because sometimes if you create a digital story and you use other people's opinions in your digital story, popular publishing websites like YouTube may claim rights, and your video will be um, how to put that? Your video will be put under the copyright claim. So you will not be able to share it, and then you will have restrictions. So it's better to use your own ideas. Story mapping. After we have identified our central topic, after we have researched on that topic and watched some examples, now we can map our stories. Story mapping is basically writing small parts of the story. So you have the structure, exposition, the background information, then the conflict or the problem you are addressing, then your call to the action and your resolution or your high point. So take a paper, or you can do it on Microsoft Word as well. Just draw the structure and try to write 2 or 3 sentences around each part. Well, any ideas that comes to your mind is okay. Here your work Doesn't have to be perfect. It's just your ideas. Organize them into sentences, put them down. So that's the big picture of what your story contains. Story mapping is very important when writing a narrative because it will make a big picture of your narrative clear to yourself. After having this clear map, it's like a road map. You know where to go, how to go, and how to continue your story. I mean, you will not be stuck in writing if you try story mapping. There are some story mapping software programs and websites available online. Later in the chat box, I will share with you some of the links. If you would like to work in your device, if you would like to do mapping in your device rather than on a paper, wherever you do that, whatever you choose, it's okay. The main thing is that you have to map your story so that you will clearly see where your narrative is going. Well, after you have mapped your story, we will move on to the drafting part. Here, I suggest you drafting as many times as possible. Writing is a process rather than an end product. So as many times as you work on it, it's going to be more successful. I recommend you doing at least 3 drafts. In first draft, you don't have to write too much. Just you have an idea and write one long paragraph summarizing your story. That's just a summary. That's just what will happen in story. For example, if you are touching the issue of lack of education for young girls or restricted access to education for young girls, you can summarize your paragraph. You can summarize your story like, I know a girl who had dreams about higher education, but instead of this, she was prepared for a marriage life. She was denied the right to study at university or something like this. Just come up with a summary so that you will know what to work on. This summary is going to be your basic plot. Later, things you add will be built upon this. So when you have your first draft, when you know what your story is going to be about, you can work on your second draft. In second draft, we will mostly pay attention to structural organization. So as I told you, it's important to have clear beginning, body, and ending in narratives. After having your summary, you have to organize your ideas like in introduction, in main part, and in conclusion part in the second draft. The second draft will be mostly about organizing your ideas. After you have organized your ideas clearly, after you have mapped it clearly, you know which ideas, which words go in the beginning, which ones will be at the high point, and which motivational words or urging to action will come at the end. Now you have a clear organization. After that, you can come up with a third draft. In a third draft, you will write each and every sentence you would like to include in your story. Then you can go back to it, correct your sentences, take a look at your vocabulary. I really recommend you using strong words in your narrative, but strong words don't usually mean very difficult words. Sometimes simple words really make more sense in narratives than strong words, than difficult words. I mean, use simple words, but use them in such a way that has never been heard before. It will create more empathy in your listeners. So, pacing, as we told in the beginning, is really important in digital story making because your narrative should move parallelly with the multimedia you use. You have to prepare your pacing in such a way. You can draw this big circles here in order to know how much time you are going to give to each idea. So exposition or setting the stage part. Would you like it to be big? Not really. It has to be just introductory part. You shouldn't really spend half of your story introducing your topic, because then you will not have enough time for your turning point. So exposition will take this much time, then you will give another idea its own pace, then here in the center you will put your most important idea. So most of the narrative should be around it. Then you will prepare your suggestions, you will prepare motivational words at the end, and this is basically how much time should each idea be given in your digital story. Based on this map, you can later choose your multimedia and design it accordingly. So final revisions and editing. When your students will be shifting away. So when they have this piece of writing, if you use digital storytelling as a tool in the classroom. So here in the final revisions part, you will be asking them to work on the mechanics. Well, this is not going to be written work, that's going to be narrative which is told by you in digital stories. So you will not be paying too much attention to punctuation or spelling, but rather than to sentence connection, and you have to omit the words that sound weird, and you have to try to omit repetitions. You will basically work on your words and your grammar. So here's the plan of a digital story given in such a way that is very useful. So first of all, after your narrative is ready, before starting designing of your digital story, set goals. Set goals. It means that you have to aim at certain things. For example, within your story, you are aimed to deliver one message in 10 sentences or something like this. Have a clear goal in mind. Then identifying your audience will also help you greatly. If you are going to address young learners with your story, you will choose different language, right? You will be talking in a language which is softer, which touches them. You will be using simpler words. Or if you are using a target audience of, let's see, aging people, of course, you will choose different vocabulary, you will choose different expressions, and etc. So your narrative language will be based on your audience. Digital stories are created for the audience. So audience is the main thing to consider when writing a narrative. And of course, your resources are very important. Well, digital stories cannot be applied to classroom without using technology. Here, technology resources is the main thing. We will be coming back to technology in our next workshops.